Okay, my friends, I want to do another transition example with you now. I am here on the new Alpine.js webpage, alpinejs.dev, and I go here on the top right on the link Dive In, which leads me to the documentation. And here on the left, where you see directives, we have X transition here. So we open that page. And we're going to scroll down a little bit, or also we could click here on the right on applying CSS classes. Let's do that. And this is the method that I want to show you now. You see, that's a few lines of code, but maybe in some cases it's worth it. So let's head over to our editor. And please open now the file in the folder Theory Part 2. I want you to open the file xtransition.html. And also I want you to start the live server and then see how this page looks like in the browser. And this is the page. So what we have here is again another menu. So if I click here on this button, I have a small menu that shows. And if I click again on the button, or if I click outside here, the menu disappears. I have to admit that this example is not my own example. I got it from another developer. Her name is Shruti Balasa, and she spoke on the last Alpine.js online conference, which was just a few days ago. So if you want to check out Shruti Balasa, you can click on this link here. You will reach her Twitter account and you can find her YouTube account here. I think she is a very nice and also a very smart person, and I think she has some interesting videos here on YouTube. All right, so let's go back to the example. What I want to add now is some transitions when the menu appears and also when it disappears. Now it's very instantly, as you can see. So here on the right in number 4, I prepared you some code, and please copy this now. I will just do this example with you now, and afterwards I will explain it to you. So let's copy those lines here and let's go to the editor. And then here's the button, as you can see. Goes from here to here. And down there you have the div with the actual navigational points. And here, we did that before, you have an X show with a variable, so it means the navigational points show when this variable or when this property is true. We did that before. Now let's go one line below this X show here. Let me just close this here. Let's make a line break here and let's paste in what we just copied. All right. Let's fix the indent here. Let's save and let's see what we get in the front end. Now, as you can see, we have an animation. So what we can see is that the menu slides in from the top, and when it slides out, it also goes from the bottom back to the top. Like this. But you may also realize, or you may also see that when I do the sliding in, it is slower than when I do the slide out, the hiding. Okay, so let's have a look in the code that we just inserted. So what is really important to be aware of in this example is that we now are dealing with classes. So what you see here are all classes. So transition is a class, ease in is a class, duration 500 is a class, opacity 50 is a class, and so on. And those classes, they come from Tailwind CSS. You can also use your own classes, but we are using the classes of Tailwind CSS. So Tailwind CSS, just to remind you, we included up here in the top of the document. So those classes here are all shortcuts for CSS properties that have to do with CSS transitions. Let's head over to the web page, to the front end, and scroll down. I provided you a link here down here in the reference section. The second link, let's click on that. Here we have a page where the CSS transitions are explained, right? So you have in CSS those transition properties, right? You can define what can be transitioned. Let's scroll down a little bit. There's some examples here. All right, and if you want, you can, if you're not so fit with CSS transitions, you can read over this. It's very interesting. And if you go all the way down, you also have further links here that explain further aspects of CSS transitions, like, for example, the duration, the delay, and other things. All right. Now let's have a look at the classes in Tailwind CSS. So I click on the first link here in reference. And here you can see that you are on the Tailwind CSS documentation, and here you can see what is behind these classes that we used in our example. For example, in our code here, we have this transition class, okay? And here in the documentation of Tailwind CSS, you can see what is behind this transition class, okay? So for example, here is defined that with the transition class, you have a transition of background color, border color, color, fill, and so on. And you also have a standard transition duration of 150 milliseconds, okay? So that means only with inserting this transition class, you already have defined a lot of things, okay? But those things can be modified also, okay? Let's head back to the editor. For example, here you have a duration of 500 milliseconds that is defined in this duration class here. Let's go back to the documentation of Tailwind CSS. Let's click here on the left on transition duration. And here you can see a list of all available durations that come from Tailwind CSS. If you want to have a different duration than those preset values here, you still can define your own class, which we will do in just 2 or 3 minutes in this lecture. All right. So now let's head back to the editor and let's have a closer look on the Alpine.js part of this example. So here you have 6 lines of code. You can divide those 6 lines in 2 blocks of 3 lines each. All right. Let's do it like this so it's easier to see. So the first 3 lines here, they define the showing part of the transition. So when our element fades in, okay? And the second 3 lines define with the keyword leave Okay, up here you have the keyword enter, and down here you have the keyword leave. So that's the part when our element fades out. So these blocks here with 3 lines each, you can divide further. And let's make a break here after the first line. So in the first line, where you just say X transition : enter, you define the general properties of your transition. So we have this transition class that defines what can be transitioned. Then here we have the timing function. The timing function is how the transition goes during the time. So ease in means it starts slowly and then it becomes fast. Down here we have ease out. That means it starts slow and then it becomes fast in the end of the transition. Actually, I usually use ease in out. That is like this. Okay. That is good in most cases, I think. Ease in out. Ease in out means it starts slow, then it becomes faster, and then it ends slower again. All right. And then here in the end, we have a duration of 500 milliseconds defined in this class, which overrides the standard 150 milliseconds that we already have defined in this class. Just to remind you, here in the transition class, we have a standard of 150 milliseconds, which we override here with this class. All right. Now let's have a look at those 2 lines here. The 2 lines, they start with transition enter start, and here you have enter and. So here in those 2 lines, you define more specifically what you want to change during the transition. So I will show you in a second what this transform class is. Let's start here with origin top. Origin top means that the animation goes from the top to the bottom, right? If we look here, we see that this div here appears from the top to the bottom, and it goes back up to the top again. All right. Then we start with a Y scale of 0. That means in the beginning there's no visibility in a Y direction. Okay. And then we have the full visibility in a Y direction. Also, we have a change in opacity starting with 50%, and we end in with 100%. Also in the beginning, our div has no shadow, and then here it has a large shadow in the end. These are all little details that make your animation look nice. Okay. Now, what is this transform class? So you have to be aware that transform is different from transition, even though it sounds the same, almost the same. If we look in the Tailwind documentation again, you have this section with transforms here. All right. So in the transform, you have defined more things that can change. For example, you can change with translate, you can change the position, you can change the angle with rotation, and also the scaling if you want to. All right. So, for example, here we have this transform origin classes, and here we find, for example, this origin top here, which is a short form for the CSS transform origin colon top. All right. And this we have here in the source code. Okay. That's because we're using this origin top and this scaling properties here. That's why we need to add a transform class here. If you have a less sophisticated transition, then you don't need this transform classes. All right. Okay. So now if you want, you can play around with this. Right? For example, we could change the duration. Let's say we change the fading out duration from 200 milliseconds to 1000 milliseconds here. We could do that. So now when we fade out, it goes slower, as you can see, okay? But I usually do it like this, that for the fading in, I use a little bit more time, but the fading out, I do pretty fast. So I go back to 200 milliseconds here. Now, let's do another twist to our example that is really nice, and we want to animate the button now up here. So let's go back to the web page, and I prepared a little snippet for you here in number 5. Let's copy this. So this snippet here, again, it's not my idea. I have it from Shruti, where this is the person that created this example here for the Alpine conference, for the Alpine JS conference. All right, so let's copy this snippet here and let's go to the editor, and here in our button, here after this click away, we insert this snippet. And just remember, by the way, this click away, in the future it will be click outside when the version 3 of Alpine JS is stable. You have to use click outside here. All right, but now let's have a look on our expression here. So what you have here is a kind of ternary expression, a very short form of a ternary expression. It means that if the property is open, is true, then you have this class of rotate 45. All right. And this rotate 45 again, you find here in the Tailwind classes. Rotate 45, it means a forward rotation of 45 degrees. So let's try that out now. I hope I saved. All right. And now when we run our animation, you can see a rotation of 45 degrees. So it looks like an X now. All right. And it goes back also. And by the way, if you look very closely, this button here, it's not only jumping to an angle of 45 degrees, it is actually moving there. All right. And this is one of the really crazy things in Tailwind CSS. But anyway, you can change the values now. For example, you can say, for example, I want to have a rotation by 180 degrees here. All right. And then it would look like this. Okay. It has a full half round now, 180 degrees. So the last thing I want to show you in this lecture is what happens if you want to do a transition that is not available in the Tailwind standard classes. Well, if you don't use Tailwind at all, then you would really have to start at the beginning with CSS transitions, and then you go here and you start with your transition properties and so on. But let's assume that you do use Tailwind CSS, but you want to have a property that doesn't exist in Tailwind CSS. So for example, let's assume that the duration of your fading in should be 4 seconds. And if we look in the Tailwind CSS documentation, here in transition duration, we have only the possibility of a duration of a maximum of 1000 milliseconds, so 1 second. So in this case, you have two possibilities if you want to make it longer. The first possibility is that you install Tailwind CSS not with a CDN, but you install it with NPM, so as a package. If you install Tailwind CSS as a package, you can extend Tailwind CSS very easily and then just make a new compilation with NPM. But we don't have that here because we included Tailwind CSS just as a simple CDN up here, right? So there's another possibility how we can add our 4 seconds transition here. And that would be that we use our own class. So actually I already have it here. So I added this class here, duration minus 4000. So this class is very similar to this Tailwind classes. So I used the same naming system, duration minus 4000, and I put a transition duration of 4 seconds. All right. So you can also use seconds here in CSS for that. And now all I have to do is to go down here into our example. Instead of duration 500, I use the class, my own defined class, duration 4000. All right. So I overwrite again the standard duration. Sorry. Let's go back to the front end. Now you can see it's opening very slowly in 4 seconds. Alright guys, that's all for this lecture. I know it was a very long lecture, but the next lecture will be very short, I think. In the next lecture, we will talk about the Alpine JS directive Xcloak. See you there.